All right, thanks so much, Tim, and thanks everybody who joined us this week for the second part in our series, and you should all now see my screen here. You know, Tim's cover slide said Mike and I have helped more than 40 fleets with their transition planning, and what we have learned is that the longest part of our project is helping our clients collect their data. It is different than your asset data or what you have stored in a piece of paperwork, because when you need to buy a new car or truck, you can just go to Sourcewell or run to the dealer and get a quote, buy a vehicle. But when you start working with electric vehicles, you have to plan a little bit more, or a zero emission vehicle, or even moving to something like if you're going to move to propane or some other fuel that you haven't done before, you just have to think about it a little bit. And so our goal today is to give you almost what we do as an intake interview with our clients, to help you start putting that information together so that you are ready. And first off is a little bit on what we do as part of that transition plan. So we look at it as 3 pieces, but sometimes they're happening together. And today we're really going to talk about this fleet plan. That's the first part. And what vehicles do you have? How do you use them? How are you going to replace them? Last week, Mike talked quite a bit about the infrastructure plan, and he talked about the data that he needs and what we look at to plan for the infrastructure. And if you missed that, the recording and the presentation is on the Clean Cities website. And then for some of our clients, we're also looking at what they might do with energy. Do you need to generate some energy? Do you want to move to green hydrogen? Are you looking at the overall grid impacts? So today we're really focused on this fleet plan. And let me start with the scope. The first time that we sit down with clients, we ask them, why are you doing this? What's influencing this change, and which vehicles are you including? And I'm going to cover each one of these in a little bit more detail, but this is our overall intake. All of the things that we want to know so that we can help you properly plan for the transition. So let's start with those influencers. Now, for most of us, most of our fleets, it is some state regulation that's driving this, whether it's advanced clean trucks or clean transit, or if you're outside of California, some other regulation that says thou shalt reduce fuel, carbon emissions, air quality, whatever it is. But we also know that many of our clients, whether they're municipal fleets or private fleets, have other motivating factors. And it's important to know which all of those are. And you'll see that I have quite a bit of a list of the things that we have run up against so far. It doesn't mean it's an exhaustive list, and there may be other motivational factors that you have. Yesterday, we talked to a potential client in Texas, and for them, it's about carbon neutrality, that they have as a city goal moving to carbon neutral by 2040. And so they're always looking for carbon neutrality. One of the reasons it's important to look at these is to know that the timelines often conflict with each other. We're working with one fleet right now that has a regulatory driver that has one date and a city council driver that has another date. And those two timelines are clashing as we help them figure out their plan. So make sure they agree, look to see if they conflict. If you need to, you might need to go back to city council or a board of directors and help get those things aligned so that they're at least with all the same year, if not the same couple of months. So our next thing that we ask in this scope is to really think about what vehicles you want to include. Now that sounds pretty simple. It's our vehicles. However, is it just light duty? Are you looking at medium and heavy duty? How about off-road equipment, like great big tugs or forklifts in a warehouse? Construction equipment, do you have diggers and backhoes? Are you looking to electrify all of those, or is it just those on-duty vehicles? Then we also look at contractors. We have many municipalities and some private fleets that also expect their contracted services, the people who are performing tow truck operations or doing sewer inspections, or even their delivery vehicles, something that's coming from Amazon. they want all of those to be on a transition timeline as well. So are we including those vehicles that you may not have control over? And that really also impacts contracts that you're signing with vendors moving forward. Then we want to know about the charging infrastructure. Is it just for your fleet? Do you want to provide it for your employees? Is it the same charger? Are you sharing them? And then do you also want to extend this to the public so that you're providing it for customers or clients or other folks that you serve? That whole vehicle, that whole timeline and the vehicles that you include is really important. We have one city right now that is applying the contractor rule, but they have to electrify their own fleet by 2030, but their contractors, they're giving them till 2035. And that's a big impact on how we plan infrastructure, because those contractor vehicles are parked at the corp yard, and we need to know when those vehicles are coming in to make the whole plan for them. And then Mike has a really good example from the city of Fremont, and I think he shared it last week, about where they really started with just doing fleet charging, and they ended up with an entire strategy for employees and public charging as well.
Actually, that was South San Francisco. But
San Francisco. Yep.
But I would like to point out one thing on that last slide, and that is for Fremont, since that kind of reminded me, emergency response vehicles. So there's a lot of hesitancy in the world about police and fire, and there's some issues there. So that can be a real interesting challenge for municipal fleets.
So our next thing that we want to go to is about, are you enforcing your own processes? Every fleet we've worked with so far has said, our replacement process is 10 years, 100,000 miles, and none of them are doing it. And there are a lot of reasons for not doing it. We have clients who say, well, we never really retire anything. We keep all of our old vehicles because we might need them one day, or we like them for spare parts. You know, I liken that to why we all have mini warehouse storerooms too, because we have stuff that we might need one day and we don't want to get rid of it. We have fleets that say we have a budget, our budget gets cut every year, and therefore we only replace the vehicles for the person who screams the loudest and says, mine has to go first. And sometimes that's after 5 years, sometimes it's after 25 years. We have other clients that say we don't have any plan at all. Every year we get allotted a budget, and that's when we decide what we're going to replace. And then other clients who are really well prepared really look at their O&M costs, and they do replace based on O&M cost. This graphic that you see here is from a friend of ours that we work with from Longebert Ross Consulting, and they have a software product called Profit. And what they show in all of this is the vehicle replacement schedule. Everything that's red in their algorithm is overdue. Everything that's yellow is going to be due, and green and light green are good to go for now. So you're probably running your own algorithm. The question for you is, are you enforcing it? And if you're looking at some type of ZEV replacement, EV or fuel cell, are you allowing enough time? Because with these things, if you're going to install charging infrastructure, you really have to think ahead. And some of the vehicles, particularly when we get into medium and heavy duty, they're 9 months to a year delivery. So you can't think you're going to run over to the truck store and buy one today. So your schedule has to allocate enough time for that replacement. The next piece in our process is looking again at those existing contracts that you have. And there are a few in here that factor in. A lot of municipal and private fleets have their own fueling stations, and they have long-term contracts for fuel. We really would like to try to time the transition when your fuel contract is expiring, or to look at what your obligations are in those fuel contracts. Sometimes the contractor owns the station, and if you end the contract, you lose access to all of your other underground tanks and other infrastructure. So we want to look at that one. We also have folks that are outsourcing vehicle maintenance and service and warranties. And if you're outsourcing those to someone else, as you shift into new types of vehicles and stations, it will impact those contracts. Cooperative purchasing agreements. This is Sourcewell. This is Mayor's Climate Compact. this is the Houston, Galveston area, whatever you're using. If you're starting to think about a vehicle that you want to standardize on or replace with, it's time now to talk to those folks that are doing the cooperative purchasing and see how you can get your vehicles on the contract. Same thing is to look and see what's not there, or that if you have been GMC, you're always GMC or GMC all the time, guess what? You might need to move to Ford if that's what your cooperative purchasing agreement is. Labor contracts. This has come up with a few clients lately. Right now, there is nothing in wage and hour laws about charging a vehicle. So we often think we're going to have our person charge the car during their lunch break. I believe that will be deemed on the clock time, just as if you ask them to do some other work-related duty. You know, the way that lunch breaks, unpaid lunch breaks work for hourly employees right now is you cannot dictate where they have to be, and you cannot ask them to stay in a certain area. And so I think if you're saying go to this charger and plug the car in during your lunch break, I think that might be a violation of wage and hour law. I want you to check with your attorneys and see what that looks like. The other thing that we really want to pay attention to, check with your attorneys about what your obligation is for providing ADA access. Many of those things are changing as we install chargers and what type of vehicles you provide. So I'm not giving you legal advice. I am asking you to check with your attorneys. And then the other thing is this contracted services. And I mentioned that early. Make sure if you're look at who is providing services to you, what that contract says, if you're going to start asking them to move to zero emission as well. So the other part is when things come up for rebid, let's do some calculations. We're working with a lot of clients right now as their diesel contracts come up to rebid to include renewable diesel, but you can't put renewable diesel and plain diesel in the same storage tank. So let's look at how we rebid all of those. Okay, here's the big one, your inventory. We have spent as little time as a month and as much as 14 months helping fleets grab their inventories. A lot of folks are using AssetWorks or Maximo or sometimes an Excel spreadsheet and sometimes a Word document to track the vehicles as they're purchased, and then maybe update it when it goes in for maintenance and maybe not. That's awesome as long as it's accurate. We haven't seen yet a fleet inventory that is accurate. And I don't mean to say people are not doing the work. It is not typical for us to, as humans, to go back in and update databases. If you even think about in your office, you were probably assigned a mouse and a keyboard and it has a little barcode on it. And at some point your mouse broke and you just got another one. And you probably did not go back in the asset database and update the barcode on your mouse. My mouse does not have a barcode on it because I just went to Target and bought one day. So, you know, vehicles are the same way. They get wrecked, they get traded, they get retired. There are all sorts of things that happen. So this list shows you what we look for in a vehicle inventory. Most people have at least a vehicle VIN, make, model, and model year. We had one vehicle inventory that had cars 17, trucks 5, forklifts 2, and that was the complete vehicle inventory. So what we really want to see though is how those vehicles are being used and where those vehicles are parked or living, because that really helps us understand what is going to be best for driving and charging, because the folks who are driving these vehicles, they're doing a job. They're not driving an EV to work. They are driving an EV for work. And we want to make sure that they are never impacted to do their job. So I have this already in a spreadsheet. I am happy to send you this spreadsheet so that you can look at this and start thinking about how you update things in AssetWorks or Maximo, how you start gathering some of this information now. Like I said, in our fleet transition, this is the piece that takes the most time to complete. Now I'm going to jump out and show of this for a second and show you another screen. I'm going to stop that share. I'm going to start another screen share really quickly because I want to show you one of our vehicle inventories.
And while you're transitioning, I just want to point out the importance of not just completeness, but the accuracy of that data. We spend a lot of time in data cleaning, and that can really impact the project schedule and the project budget, because we can't start the next phase of the analysis until we've analyzed basically the energy requirements from the fleet. And so this is a key step in the process. And so if we're going back and scrubbing the data and looking for duplicates and gaps and whatnot, that can really kill the budget and the time. So just, really important.
So this is one of our real clients. I have scrubbed this data to anonymize it, so it's missing anything that you would know who they are. It is a municipality. But I highlighted here some of the things that we go back to fill in. So, and I also hit a lot of rows in this. I'm missing some. So this 1987 Chevy Blazer, first off, why are they operating 1987 Chevy Blazer? What we found with this one is you'll notice that it doesn't have a department, a domicile, or a domicile address. And a domicile, by the way, is the place that it lives, place that it parks overnight or when it's not working. It is its home. The reason that these were blank is this vehicle was actually retired probably 10 years ago, but was never removed completely from Asset Works or Maximo. They use Maximo. So that's one that we found that was just not there. The next one are these two Ford Rangers. They're in here with two different numbers. 1996 Ford Rangers. We have all of this information. That was the same car. At some point, somebody couldn't find it when they looked it up, so they created another listing. And then the second one stopped being updated and the first one was updated. So that one's a duplicate. These two Peterbilts are also the same vehicle, the two that I've highlighted down here. So we go through and we find the ones that are duplicate. The next little thing I want to point out to you is this workhorse truck. It says it belongs to wastewater maintenance, but it also says it belongs to refuse. This vehicle was transferred between departments one day, and I'm not sure which vehicle got the transfer, but they didn't quite finish everything that's updated here. So I will tell you that with this particular client, they had just shy of 1,000 vehicles in Asset Works or in Maximo, but they actually only had 942 vehicles because they also had a lot of tools listed. And those tools like drills and saws were just miscategorized as vehicles. So just run through and make sure everything here is filled in. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but it needs to be really close. And this is just a great way to know too, if you've got vehicles that are sitting largely unused, or so-and-so is assigned this Chevy Blazer, but they really hate the Blazer and they take the Tahoe instead because nobody's using the Tahoe. This gives you a good idea of how to allocate those, or how to better allocate those vehicles. We also see in these inventories a lot of four-wheel drive SUVs. May surprise you to know that with a battery electric or a fuel cell electric, there are 0 four-wheel drive SUVs. So it's a good opportunity to understand if that vehicle is exactly what that person wants. And again, one of our fleets, they said up and down 1,000 times that the permitting and the code enforcement people had to have SUVs. When we asked them, they said no, they'd really rather have little cars because the big SUVs were too hard to park. So just because you always did something doesn't mean we need to do it going forward. There are a couple of ways that you can start collecting data. We have one client right now that's doing a survey of all of their drivers. We have another client that's doing a lot of it with telematics, or we have many clients that are doing it with telematics. And telematics is awesome, but not everybody has that. Some of it is going out and counting cars. the client that I told you that they had it in a Word document, it's close to where I am in Sacramento. So I drove there and I counted their cars for them and wrote down the odometer readings and got all of the information. And they had about twice as many cars as they had listed in their Word document. So again, this is not to cast aspersions. We are all busy people. We are operating vehicles. We are doing things, and keeping it all updated in the database is not top of list. However, as we start planning for a transition, we need to grab this information. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen and I'm going to bump back over to my PowerPoint. And pick up where I left off here. I'm not a Zoom user, I'm a Teams user. I get confused. Go ahead, Mike.
This is actually Danny Lehman with EMWD. One thing I was going to mention on what you just was talking about updating your data. We had a real bad issue when I started about 10 years ago. So we created our own database. I found 20 cars I couldn't smog because they weren't there. One thing that really helps is, one, make sure you get that information in when you first come in. But we also, I have got a spreadsheet that I pull from RTA that we maintain as it started off as Danny's list, has become the go-to for the district. But we publish that once a month, and we also send it out at budget time to the different departments. And what that does is, a lot of times they'll bring any errors to our attention that we weren't aware of. So that actually helps a great deal by sharing that information. We were embarrassed to it at first because it was so bad when I first came in, but it really helps by sharing that information posted monthly. And a lot of people will come forward as they look at it eventually and help you correct it.
That's awesome. Thank you, Danny. Thanks for adding that. So the one thing that we don't really have in the database, or maybe even in Danny's list, is what the duty cycle is. And this is one of the more challenging things to collect. And I want to give you a couple of examples of duty cycle. The first one is public works van. We look at it on paper, drives 12 miles a day. It's a cargo van, really easy to replace. Heck, that sucker could go once a week without being charged. However, when we go out and look at the duty cycle on it, it's actually a CCTV van that has all of these cameras to do fuel inspection or sewer inspection. And when it's operating, the engine is providing power to the camera and a bunch of other electronic devices that are inside this van. Plus, it's operated in a really hot part of California, and the engine idles to air condition the inside of the van. It's part of their, it's a labor contract thing to provide shelter for the technician. So when we look at this duty cycle, it is not 12 miles a day. This is something that needs a fairly substantial battery life and may even need a APU inside to help provide power to the camera to do its entire day of work. So another example of a duty cycle is police cars, something that Mike really loves. And we have some police departments that are using Tesla cars already. The Mustang has said they're going to build a special purpose police car out of the Mach-E. So it would have all of the equipment in it. And, you know, they're fast. They have a lot of benefits for being police cars. However, one of our clients does what they call hot seat car swapping. The police car never stops. They actually change officers out on the road in middle shift. So these cars, the longest they ever stop is for 5 or 10 minutes at unpredictable places, except during meal breaks, which could be constituted as a violation of labor and wage and hour laws if we're asking them to go to a certain place and plug in. So what should we do here? We could provide a lot of DC fast charging throughout the city. And what our advice to them, though, is to buy extra cars so that they have a couple sitting on the charger and a couple out in the community so that they have a continuous swapping of cars going on. So another example of a duty cycle. The best way to collect information about the duty cycle, if you're not doing telematics, is to ask the operators. And you don't have to ask about everything, but you do want to ask about the things that are being used every day. Our client down south, we have a survey out to their drivers right now that's asking them basically 3 questions. On a typical day, about how many miles do you drive? On an atypical day, emergency, shutdown, something, a flood, an earthquake, how many miles do you drive? When you're operating, are there places that you routinely stop with the engine off for 2 hours or more? Because if they're going to another destination where they're regularly doing work, we can put a charging station in there. And then third question is, what equipment are you operating? Are you towing something heavy? Oh, I think this is all on my next slide. Are you carrying something heavy? 3,000 pound air compressor, 7,000 pound trailer. Do you need to idle? Do you ever take this vehicle home? How often do you take it home? Do you have a special use in this vehicle? Does it need a snowplow attached to it? Or is it always used for this type of thing, like that CCTV camera? So we find one of the best ways to do this is just to ask the drivers. We don't need to know from every single driver. If we can get a representational answer, we can fill in the gaps for similar vehicles. And if we can't get that, we can use what we have seen with some of our other fleets. It might not be perfect, but it's going to be close. And if you would like a survey to send out, I will be happy to email you what we're using. It needs to be customized a little bit because everybody operates a little differently. This is also, if you don't know where your vehicle's domiciled, that's a good thing to do too. If you don't have telematics, it's just to ask the operators where this vehicle spends its night. So the last thing I want to really cover in the scoping is the budget. And I found this graphic, which is actually about sales. It's more related to sales and reality, but I love the idea of the hockey stick dream and the hairy back of reality. We can come into you with a plan that says you need to replace 53 vehicles every year, and you can use the CVRP or HVIP to cut the cost. And it's only going to cost you $7.2 million a year. If your budget is $500,000, the hairy back here, that's not going to cut it. So we really want to know what, with grants, if we can find you incentives and rebates and low carbon fuel standard credits, what's the max number of vehicles you could replace within your budget? And then can we help you find more money? Everybody thinks grants are like a money tree that grows outside your window. And it's not. It is an opportunity to compete in the beauty contest for a limited amount of money. So we want to figure out how we put this plan so that it fits within your budget. And if we need to help you make the case for a bigger budget, for a city council amendment, for something approved by the board, we can do that too. Because we can show some savings with operational savings. But for most of our clients, their operational budget for vehicles is really different than the capital budget. And it's really hard to say we're going to save money over 10 years and therefore you should give us more money next year. So we can help you make that case. The other things that I really want you to think about that help when we start this transition are your willingness to try emerging technology. Are you willing to do something crazy? CEC right now has a grant out for vehicle to building integration. That could mean grants that are technology development means something that doesn't work really well, or could have some periods of downtime, or maybe are unexpected. That's the reason that they come out. We have lots of grants for ZEV trucks right now, but they're one of custom built trucks. So are you willing to be a little risky, or maybe try something that's not quite that risky? That might be some type of remote microgrid with a battery storage system that could provide backup charging if you're way out away from home. What do you need to do for disaster preparedness and resilience? Some of our clients have to have every vehicle fully fueled at the beginning of every shift, and everyone is expected to be on call for any type of disaster response. Others have designated vehicles. And then what do we need to do with charging stations? Do we need to put in diesel backup generators? Does it need to be for everyone or only some of them? Do we need to think about battery storage? So exactly what do you need? Are there fuels that you absolutely want or do not want? Not every vehicle, and we're going to talk about this a lot next week with trucks, not every vehicle is electrified yet or will be by 2030. So we need to think about what else gets you to carbon negative or carbon neutral. Are you super loyal to a brand or a badge? Are you all GM, all GMC? Or are you willing to try something like a Lightning Motors or a BYD? Do you have the resources in-house to go after funding? Pursuing grants can be a full-time job, and then reporting to grants can be a full-time job. If you don't have those resources in-house or a contractor who can do that, can we help you find that resource to get the funding for you? What type of workforce and training needs do you have? Electric vehicles are going to require a shift in your workforce. You won't need as many people working under the hood of the vehicle. You will need more people managing the data and the charging cycles and the movement of vehicles. So how do we help your existing workforce get ready? Or how do we anticipate what you're going to need next and make sure you're hooked up with a community college or a training program to fill your pipeline as your fleet evolves? And then the final part of it, I called it change management. We heard that with Mike and I heard this with a new client coming up. What does that mean? It is just how do you get people to do something new and do something different in a way that they embrace change rather than resent change? So what can we do to help, or how can you prepare people to embrace electric vehicles rather than cross your arms and say, I don't want to drive this? So all things to think about as we start crafting this plan. So that is what I have for you today. I would like to, I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now and open it up for questions, discussions, tips that you want to give each other, funny jokes, all of those great things. So Ernie, I totally appreciate you being on camera the whole time. It makes me happy to see a smiling face while I present. And Miguel too, he's been on camera most of the time.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to say thank you for the presentation, and it's very valuable information.
Chris, I wanted to ask a general question. When you were talking about the cost, $7 million for the vehicle acquisition, you didn't say anything about the transformer service panel, trenching, installation of EVSE, that sort of thing. And I know next week when we get to medium and heavy duty, that starts to get to be a completely different order of magnitude when it comes to the amount of energy. But can you go briefly over that now as part of the issue?
So I have to tell you that this example that I gave you, that was just for cars. That was just for cars that our data shows, because they have not replaced their vehicles in a really long time, and they have lots of them that are way overdue. The math said replace all of these vehicles in 2022, and it's going to cost you $7.1 something million. And then I have to say that Mike is the one who is working right now actually on the energy calculation to understand how that's going to impact their charging. But it was a ridiculous amount of energy, like 2 million kilowatts.
And that gets spread over multiple facilities. Each fleet domicile typically has a number of chargers, so you have to break that down. But each facility requires its own separate capital project. Typically, for a large fleet deployment of more than say 6 or 10 vehicles, that often requires an electrical system upgrade, because the facilities were never designed for electric vehicles, and load demand often has increased over time since the building was built. So then you have to add that. And what we're typically looking at, a recent project we did for, I can't remember which city it was. I think it was Alameda County. Their average install for a level 2 charger was about $18,000, included all the different cost components, and much of that is the stuff you don't see as a driver. It's all the make ready infrastructure.
And then I was just wondering if you could sort of, if a part of your analysis that not only includes that issue, but also what you have to do working with the local utility, because if your power demand goes from, I don't know, 500 kilowatts to 5 megawatts at a given site, that obviously means something very significant relative to what's coming into the fence line before it gets to your courtyard. If that's part of your analysis as well.
Yeah, so what Chris was showing in the I think she had a data slide that listed some of the data we look for in fleets. We also have a similar one for the facility side, and absolutely, Tim, the utilities are a huge component. One of the good things that we're starting to see is more and more utilities are getting involved in providing support, either through providing make-ready charger programs. In some cases, they provide the whole thing. So that's certainly an important part of reducing the cost for a fleet, or potentially reducing the headaches, because in some cases the utilities actually own and operate the charging infrastructure. So it really depends. But in all cases, it's really important to recognize that your local utility or community choice aggregator is a critical stakeholder in this overall effort. And they're also a big source of the data. So understanding what the available electrical supply is to each facility is critical, and also what the future expansion capacity is, especially for large fleet facilities, because there may be grid impacts. We haven't yet seen that, but I think once we start moving from light and into more medium and heavy duty vehicles, especially for large like transit facilities, we're just starting a big transit facility for Metro here in Seattle, and that's going to potentially require, hopefully not new substations, but significant adjustments to the load.
And Tim, to answer your question maybe a little differently too, and something to think about, one of our early clients, City of Berkeley, and their report is on their website, so we can really talk freely about that one. There were a couple of places where charging just wasn't going to work. And so we had to work with them to shift around vehicles and say, move these hybrids to this place and then put the electric cars here. But they had a couple of facilities, mostly because they rented the facility. They didn't own it. We weren't going to be able to put charging in at those facilities. So there are times that's a big part of it, is juggling around and figuring out where it's going to be the lowest cost to install. So again, to that point, Tim, it's not just can the grid support it, but is it going to cost you 3 times as much money to put the charging station in the garage at Main Street as it is to put it over here on Broadway? So we really want to look at how this is all going to work out financially, because it's expensive. Let's make no bones about it. This is expensive to do. The payback is great in terms of long-time savings over fuel, savings of O&M, greenhouse gas reduction, but it's a big upfront purchase, and we want to make sure it's a smart, lowest cost possible purchase for you. Dwight, you had something?
Yeah, hi. Excellent presentation. Thank you very much. There are a lot of smaller businesses out there who want to get, excuse me, who want to get started, and who may keep their list of vehicles on a spreadsheet or on a Word file or something. So I have a question about, at what point is it cost effective or productive for one of these smaller type businesses to get into a database or get into a more formal tracking system that enables them to accumulate costs and really start to make some database decisions? At what point is it good for them to migrate? Have you encountered that? And because I know it's hard to embrace also, because it means that the users have to participate to record the data, so it can be challenging.
So at what point would we say you should invest in telematics or if you were to, I'm not going to make any recommendations because I think everybody's needs and the way things are working are different. If I had money to spend for my fleet, it would be on telematics, because telematics will do all of the tracking and it will also help you keep your inventory. But I think one of the benefits of telematics that we often overlook, and those of you who are cities or states, it may not be so important, but telematics record excellent data that can help you in case there is an accident or your car is stolen, your vehicle is stolen. And there are many insurance companies that will actually lower your rates if you have telematics because it has proof of who was at fault in an accident. You can also use telematics to be able to track distracted driving or aggressive driving behavior. So there are a lot of benefits to it. At what point would I put it on my fleet? I would probably, if I had a handful of vehicles, 3, say, I would get telematics.
Right. Yeah. Actually, it was interesting. You know, I retired from SMUD. We had Geotab data loggers on several of our vehicles. And we got a call several months ago from the current fleet manager asking if they still had the data because there was a court case involving a vehicle in a crash and they wanted to see if there was tracking data to be able to add information to the court case. So it was interesting. Yeah. Okay. Well,
So
that's a,
I,
go ahead.
no, I just saw that Ernie's sharing some great tools to use out there too. And I think there are a lot of really great tools. And I encourage you to use all of them. There's some available from Department of Transportation through the SmartWay program. Clean Cities has a plethora of great tools to use. What Mike and I are finding as we work through a lot of these tools is there are tools that are based on math and there are interviews and talking to people that are based on humans. And driving and operating your vehicle is more human than it is math. So make sure you're incorporating both.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that. You know, that idea of sort of this is a data exercise. Think about data very holistically. Yes, there's a lot of information in the spreadsheet, but the information that's not in the spreadsheet, as I think some of Chris's slides pointed out, can be even more important. And so that's why we always include a lot of effort in talking to the drivers, the fleet managers, the facilities managers to really understand what that spreadsheet doesn't show. There is we're very much in a data-driven, technology-driven society, and certainly our industry. And we tend to think, oh, it can all be solved by algorithm. And the reality is this is as much art as it is science. And every project is different. The quality of the data varies. And even, I think the expectation is, oh yeah, everybody has telematics and we're all really smart. It's great if we have it, but we can work around that and we have to be nimble, recognizing that the resources vary from fleet to fleet. Dwight, you mentioned, smaller companies that have small fleets. They're probably not going to have those kinds of resources. So we have to develop workarounds when that data is not available on a spreadsheet or in, a download from a telematic program.
Yeah, there are always.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Keith. Go ahead, Dwight. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no. I was just going to say, I think the other challenge with small companies, even if they have telematics, is to find someone who has time in their schedule to actually look at the data and begin to take advantage of the data. Because so often they're multitasking many different job tasks during the day. And it's just, I think it's challenging.
It is challenging. And there's also the perception from the drivers that Big Brother's watching you.
Yeah.
I will tell you the story that my ex-husband is a Teamster and we have not been married for a really, really long time. But when he was working for UPS, like more than 30 years ago, is just when they started putting GPS systems in the trucks, and the UPS drivers were going to go on strike because they didn't want satellites watching them. So, and now, oh my God, how do we all live without a GPS? We have it on our phone, we have it in our vehicle. So there is a little bit of a fear factor in it, and we just have to communicate that correctly. I do want to share with you really quickly three stories that kind of guide my thinking about human behavior versus what the data tells us. And the first is, I think, from Keith Leach, who I think is on the phone. Can't remember if it was Keith or Mark Stevens who told me that maybe Ernie. The story that they told me was about why they buy the cars they buy. And they said because people sit down in them with screwdrivers in their back pocket and punch holes in the seats. And so I thought, okay, that is human behavior. The car that's not your own, you don't treat like your own car. Or maybe the car that's not your own, you do treat like your own car by throwing food wrappers in it and things. The second story was from UC Irvine, who got a fleet of fuel cell vehicles and could not understand why their fuel economy was so bad. It was so much worse than anything else until they discovered that at lunchtime, one of their interns was taking the Toyota Mirai, which is a 4-passenger car, by the way, and putting 6 people in it and driving as fast as they could to lunch and back. And all of the weight in the car and the unapproved aggressive driving was really diminishing the fuel economy of that vehicle. So there's a little driver behavior and why you should have telematics. And then the final story is when I used to work with the gas station industry, when we were first talking about hydrogen fuel and also some natural gas and some other things. And the folks at the natural gas at the gas station conference always talked about the Bubba factor. And they said for every piece of new fueling technology, you have to look at it and you say, how could the dumbest person on the planet do this wrong? And we have to design around the person who is not going to follow the rules and is going to put diesel in a gas tank or is going to not turn the fuel dispenser off when it's done. So how do we make sure that we are making this really bulletproof, easy, and seamless for people? So those are 3 stories that I always bring with me. And if it was Keith Leach or Ernie, he told me about the screwdriver in the back pocket, I probably share that with every client. Ernie, I can send you the, it's not V2G, it's V2B. It's vehicle to building.
Oh, okay.
It's really unusual. So it just came out. It's quite a big grant. It's $16.9 million. I think they're going to fund multiple projects.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that.
So I will send that to everybody. Any other thoughts or questions as we wind up today?
I just wanted to, for the benefit of the group, we're currently working with the Charge Ready Transport Program with Southern California Edison down here in Southern California. And one of the key takeaways, I had a meeting with them this morning, is that part of the program, they give a demand charge incentive. So there is no peak demand charge until 2024 for early adopters. So that's a pretty great incentive to keep your rates stable. We've been scrubbing our data here, identifying the vehicles that are being affected by ACF, and we're right around 450 vehicles. So we've broken it down into phases, and so we're working with that program to get the infrastructure in place, along with some contractors, Momentum and Aero, that are going to help us blueprint the outer year rollout for the infrastructure.
That is awesome. So I do want to mention really quickly, even though we're talking about battery charging with Clean Fleet and all of the rules, fuel cell vehicles are part of that too. And here in the Sacramento area, we are very fortunate that we have 1 heavy duty hydrogen station going in, 3 light duty stations that are already open. Biotech is going to start a new green hydrogen project. I think it's already under construction in the Central Valley. That'll be a new source of hydrogen. So I heard Michael Berube from EERE say at a conference a couple of weeks ago that he thinks that batteries are great for some trucks. Hydrogen is probably great for all trucks, and it's probably only 4 to 5 years away. And if you think that that sounds like a long way, remember where we were with batteries 4 to 5 years ago.
I wanted to mention that there is some activity on heavy duty hydrogen in the region that's going on, and there will be some information out to some of the fleet operators about some of that going on. It's going to be sort of a smaller group that will be taking a little bit of a tour of various things, but there is a lot of activity for heavy duty hydrogen happening in our region. I wanted to also mention, Ernie brought up the ACF, that's the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule, and that does apply to essentially almost all fleets, certainly all public fleets, and any private fleet that has more than 50 vehicles that are over 8,500 pounds. So a lot of private fleets will be affected by that. And even any company that's anywhere in the United States that has over $50 million worth of gross revenue and operates in the state of California. So a lot of fleets will be affected by the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule.
Dwight, just before you ask your last question, could I also, Tim says our emails are here. I dropped mine in the chat. You are our beta test audience for Mike and me on this presentation, and we are giving it many more times. So if there is something that you thought was particularly good, or something we missed, or something we should skip, send us an email either this week or last week's presentation, because we appreciate you all being our
Best audience.
lab rats. Yes, our experimental people. And I know that we work with you all a lot, and I really trust your opinions, and I would love to have your feedback so we can make this even better for the next folks. Now, Dwight, over to you for your question.
Well, as far as feedback goes, both of them were excellent presentations, comprehensive but detailed with examples. So I found them very interesting. Yeah, my question is there a particular tool that you've used or would recommend when it comes to the integration of the power, excuse me, the charging for the fleet versus the building? You know, large buildings will have energy management systems where it automatically kind of integrates the two, but it's not always the case. And especially if buildings might be dispersed and perhaps even on separate transformers and panels, and which can be the case in rental situations or lease situations for the fleet operators. Is there a particular tool that you turn to or that you would consider recommending for people who are trying to integrate the two? Or do you just use a spreadsheet?
No, there's load management is a technology that's getting increasingly sophisticated, so that the whole idea is to minimize the peak power demand as a way to, initially I think it was developed to offset the demand charges that you in California are typically penalized by for loads, especially during the peak demand periods. But the load management software, and it's basically a software hardware combination, there's a lot of systems that do integrate with the building so that the building and the fleet charging can balance each other's loads. As we move forward, that technology is getting smarter, and we're going to have bidirectional capability so that we can have what we were talking about earlier with the vehicle to building or vehicle to everything or vehicle to vehicle. And so there's a number of those that we work with depending on the particular application that I think make a lot of sense, because you really have to look at, and what's also happening is that the reason that we're electrifying our fleets, that same reason, which is to reduce our carbon emissions typically, is also applying to facilities. So a lot of facilities are electrifying their HVAC systems as well. So that's the time to really look at these as a overall, it's essentially one large load. And if you can optimize between the two, you can really generate some opportunities and save some cost.
Yeah.
And Dwight, to make it further geeky, there are a lot of buildings that will manage all of their buildings across the state, city, country, world from one platform. And that's what this vehicle to building grid is grant is about, is to how to integrate it with something like Hank, which is a CEC which is a building management system that was developed with CEC funding. So yeah, that's like the next level, but we're getting there.